Are you a fan of food? I know I am.
I am too.
I had the awesome opportunity of interviewing celebrity chef Bob Blumer from the Food Network over Skype, live from Hollywood. Check it out.
So cool.
You know, my accidental career started when I was 33, so it was nowhere in the world of being an undergrad. I went to the business. Well, first of all, I did 2 years of general arts at Western, and then jumped into the HBA program, and I just loved business and was somewhat entrepreneurial. So I didn't go with any kind of ends in mind. I just went for the education and for stretching the old brain.
I'm curious. You said you did 2 years of general arts. Was there a major in a specific major you took, just out of curiosity?
I think I had a double major in girls and.
Okay. I'm not sure if they have that major anymore.
Art classes, something like that.
Oh, okay. That sounds phenomenal. But
when I grew up, I was a really fussy eater, and I think I lived like between the ages of 10 and 14 on nothing but lettuce and tomato sandwiches with butter on white toast.
Okay.
And I think I've always thought that my mother wasn't a good cook, but friends of mine have told me that she was actually an amazing cook. I just didn't eat her food, so it didn't really compute that she was a good cook.
Okay.
But when I got to Western, I quickly discovered that if you wanted to eat well, you didn't have any money because you were a starving student, as we all are.
Right. That
I would have to do some cooking, and it was also the old, I had a roommate after my first year, so I lived on right near Central Avenue.
I know Central.
And so it was like, one of us is going to cook and one of us is going to clean, and so I decided that I would be the one who cooked. And so every Saturday I would go to the farmer's market, which was in, I think it still exists.
Yeah, they still have the farmer's market.
A nicer building now. And I would buy ingredients, and I would basically do all the cooking in my tiny little flat.
Your first entry into the TV world, or actually becoming or making a name for yourself, at least as far as I know on the Food Network, at least in Canada, was your show, The Surreal Gourmet, which I think everyone knows is when you traveled around North America in this crazy but amazingly cool toaster-mobile, which was made of like aircraft aluminum steel, or aluminum rather, and you had these 2 8-foot toaster pieces of bread sticking out the top. And the cool thing about the show, at least what I found, and I think everyone would agree with, is that you didn't do the standard prepare, cook, and then show a final result. You actually got people involved, and you always had friends and family around. And you usually always invited a guest or a friend into the Toastermobile with you to help you prepare this food. Can you speak a little bit about how you came up with the show, the idea behind it, and how it actually came to fruition and finally became a successful hit?
Sure. I wrote my first cookbook 19 years ago, and for the first 10 years of being someone with a couple of cookbooks, I didn't have my own show. I appeared on tons of shows, but it became pretty evident pretty quickly that once you're in the world of cookbooks, that the holy grail is having your own show. And so I tried to get a show, couldn't get a show.
Okay.
Partially because at that point I wasn't good enough to have a show, and partially because in those days there weren't as many shows as there are now, so there weren't that many opportunities. So when my third book came out, which was called Off the Eaten Path, and I didn't have a show as a platform for the book to promote it, I decided that I would take things into my own hands, and I raised $250,000 from sponsors. This is where the business school part comes in.
Right.
I raised $250,000 from sponsors by promising to wear a chef's jacket with all these patches, the sponsor patches on it, kind of like a NASCAR driver would wear his jacket. And in those days, nobody had embroidered jackets with sponsor patches. Now it's kind of common. And so I raised all this money. I bought the shell of an Airstream from the Airstream factory. I had a kitchen built into it by a company that at the time was a struggling little company, and now they're in the news all the time in Los Angeles as being like the company doing all these food trucks.
Okay.
The Toastermobile was actually like the first ever food truck, I think.
I think so, at least on television.
And so I created the Airstream, or the Toastermobile. I hired a small crew. I had a driver, a sous chef, and an assistant, and I did a 30-city rock and roll style tour all around North America, the United States and Canada, and just did all these crazy little events, drive-by shrimp feedings, kamikaze dinner parties.
And you'd film this all. You would film it all for a show that you potentially.
No, I didn't film any of it.
Oh, you didn't film any of it. Okay.
This was just my own endeavor to promote my book.
Oh, okay.
And then when I got back from the end of this tour, I thought, hey, this would be these dinner parties would make for a fun kind of show where I sort of drive up to a location, as I did on my tour, offloaded all this gear, cooked all this food, often thematically related to who I was cooking for, and then at the end of it, threw all the tables and chairs back in the Toastmobile and drove off into the sunset.
Right.
And that's what we pitched as a show, and that show got picked up as the Food Network came online in Canada. Have you
had any formal training in any type of culinary art or school or food cooking or whatnot?
When I wrote my first cookbook, I didn't own a cookbook, and I'd never taken a cooking class.
So you just literally picked up a set of knives and decided to go to town.
Well, if you look at my first cookbook, it had my entire bachelor repertoire of recipes, none of which were surreal, and the entire repertoire was like 20 recipes,
okay.
And basically stuff that I was making for myself
every day,
dates or whatever. And but I filled out the book with things like music to cook by, recommended wine varietals, lots of just tips for how to get more out of life, regardless of what your lot in life is. Because I didn't have any money at the time. I mean, I wasn't a poor child from the projects, but I was a starving student.
Yeah.
And then I started managing a singer, so I was getting 20% of not very much. So I had to be resourceful. And so I shared a lot of my resourcefulness in the book, and that's really what the book was about. But I call myself the Surreal Gourmet because the illustrations in the book, which I did myself because I couldn't afford a photographer or an illustrator,
mm-hmm.
were somewhat surreal in style. And art was something that I had always dabbled in. In fact, I took a lot of art courses when I was at Western.
Between the majors of girls and other classes.
Yeah, and
right.
And I took art classes at the that little street with that nice, beautiful little house where they
in London.
Oh, on the campus.
Oh, on campus. No, I can't recall. I haven't taken many art classes.
Anyways, I took art classes, and I had a professor. Just to digress for a second, Patterson Ewan, who went on he's a very famous Canadian painter, sadly deceased. But at the time, he was teaching the 101 art class.
Okay.
And you can find his work at the AGO. He was an amazing, amazing painter. And I can't believe that in retrospect, he was my art prof.
And he inspired you to do these drawings in your first cookbook, per se?
No.
No?
No. But the art classes just were part of my evolution as a little burgeoning artist. And so I illustrated my first book with these illustrations, which were somewhat surreal. I called myself the Surreal Gourmet, which had nothing to do with the food presentation. But when the book came out, people started asking me what was surreal about the food. And that made me start to think, hey, I could create surreal dishes. So dishes made from one set of ingredients but presented to look like something completely different. And that's when I got on the path of surreal food. Is
there anything that me, viewers, the world can look forward to that's coming from the realm of Mr. Bob Blumer, whether it be TV or print?
Well, my new book, Glutton for Pleasure,
right,
just came out at the end of the year, just before Christmas.
Okay.
And that has all my favorite recipes from the last 18 years, from my books, from my shows, from my columns, from my own things I make at home for myself. So that's sort of the best of all my recipes, a bunch of epic stories, including a big story about the inaugural Toastermobile tour around North America that we just talked about.
Right.
And then a lot of my kitchen etiquette and sort of how to set up a kitchen and all that. So that just came out, and I'm very, very, very proud of that. Cool. I am working on a new show that I was chastised for talking about recently, so I'm not allowed to talk about it. But suffice to say, it's a cross between Anthony Bourdain's No Reservations and drive-ins, diners, and whatever the hell that show's called. And it involves lots of travel and crazy locations and all that kind of stuff. And we'll find out pretty shortly if that's going to fly or not. Hi, folks. Bob Blumer here, host of Glutton for Punishment. Coming to you all the way from Hollywood, California. As cliche as that sounds, I'm looking out my window at the D of the Hollywood sign. And I just want to say it is a pleasure to be here on the Big Purple Couch.
Beautiful. Can we...